There's this one question that I've been thinking of for quite some time, since my fourth video to be more specific. Humans are different from other animals because of three fundamental skills. Those being our ability to run very far without getting tired, our ability to throw things, and our ability to tell stories. While the former two are not as used in the modern world, the latter is literally the thing that our civilization is built upon. Commonly used for practical purposes such as conveying information to your fellow human being, and sometimes for the sake of entertainment. Stories. They've been with us since the inception of language. The oldest one we have record of is very fittingly A Quest for Eternal Life. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written almost 5,000 years ago in modern-day Iraq, but it's very safe to assume that other tales have been told for much longer than that. Be they comedic, cautionary, tragic, or whatever else, if their main purpose is entertainment, they most likely take place in a fictional universe. But that brings the question, which of those universes is the largest? This question can be a bit tricky to answer because what you consider to be the biggest fictional universe will depend on what aspect you're measuring. Word count, area, time, fandom? There's a different answer to each of them, so what I did here is that I found the best contenders for each category, and while I will tell you which one I think takes the cake, as I was doing the research for this video, I found out that the answer to every category can be very subjective depending on what parameter you're using. If your answer differs from mine, please let me know. I choose the ones I picked based on the criteria that made the most sense to me, but you might pick something else, and that's okay. Either way, I'd love to hear about it. The categories I'll be analyzing will be the following. First, we have word count, which is respective of how many words have been dedicated by official authors to the universe in question. We also have area, literally meaning just the biggest one by area. And finally, we have timeline, which universe took the most time to happen, if that makes sense. Let's begin. Word count is a tricky one because, like, who's gonna count all the words in the dozens, maybe hundreds of different books in the various different series? Due to practical reasons, there are bound to be a couple of approximations, a few uncertainties by an order of magnitude or so, who's to say? So, from the extensive 10-minute research I conducted about this specific topic, I've come up with two possible contenders, exactly the ones I expected. Star Wars and Warhammer 40k. You know what Star Wars is, so I'm not going to bother explaining it to you, but Warhammer is more unknown by the masses, which is interesting considering the genuinely insane amount of content that there is about it. Summarizing the lore of Warhammer is equivalent to describing all the contents of an entire library in like 3 lines. Seriously, while I was procrastinating on the making of this video, I watched a couple of hour-long lore videos on Warhammer, and I genuinely feel like I haven't even scratched the first atomic layer of the surface. But even so, I feel like I have a very, very rough grasp of what the story is about, and it can all be described very well with one of its sentences. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. Warhammer is a grimdark setting, in which in other words means that everything in the universe is carefully made to be as unpleasant as possible. You know how a lot of stories include grey morality, where no side is inherently good or bad? Stories like this stand in counterpart with the ones that use black and white morality, when one side is absolutely good and the other one is absolutely bad. Warhammer looks at that and says, no, but wait, what if we made all sides evil? Except for these guys, which are pretty chill apparently. The 40k in the title is in reference to the fact that the story takes place in the 41st millennium, aka 40,000 years from now. Humanity has become an interstellar spacefaring civilization that has managed to colonize multiple different planets. Unfortunately, half of all humans are religious zealots worshipping the half-dead body of their emperor, while the other half have deserted from humanity's empire in favor of either doing their own thing or serving the gods of chaos, which apparently have some parallels with the Four Horsemen, but I might be talking out of my ass. Now, what I did here is that I summarized very briefly the contemporanean story of one of the factions. There are like 11. I simply described the current state of the Imperium of Man, but there are also the Tyranids, the Eldar, the Chaos Demons, the Chaos Astartes, the Drukhari, the Orcs, the Necrons, the Tau Empire, and probably many more that I can't fit here in this video because there are so many categories and subcategories and intersect between them that at this point you might as well just go to a dedicated channel. Did I mention it's a board game? It's a board game. But there are novels. Enough with the ADD tangent, let's get to what matters. So, from what I could find, the number of novels and stories about Warhammer number in the hundreds. If we're including ebooks, audio dramas, and short stories, that number is well above 600. There are so many that Google doesn't even have a conclusive answer, so I'll just have to resort to my favorite source, the I Made It the Fuck Up Research Institute. Estimating, I'm going to estimate it. The average book has around 100,000 words, but since there are short stories thrown into the mix, let's say that the average Warhammer story has 80,000 words. Doing this multiplication gives us at least 48 million words from language-based media alone. Throw in the video games and we can bump that number by a little bit more. From what I could find, the Star Wars Expanded Universe has around 381 full books. Assuming that they all have 100,000 words, we can multiply that to get 38 million words. But that's just from the books. If we include the movies, comics, and animated series and all that shit in the Expanded Universe, Fuck, I don't know, we get probably less than my Warhammer estimate? I don't know by how much, but let me try to explain my reasoning. The 9 movies have a word count of around 65,000, and let's say that for the sake of easy math there are 135,000 more from the offspins and live-action series. Each comic book issue has on average 140 words per page and an average of 32 pages per issue. I found that there are about 1,300 Star Wars comics plus 35 graphic novels with an average word count of 2,500 each. That gives us a total of 5.9 million words from the comics and graphic novels, and let's assume that Rebels, the Clone Wars and the anime have about a million together. Then our grand total count for Star Wars is going to be 43.9 million, which is alarmingly close to Warhammer. Close enough that it could go either way depending on how lenient you are with the estimations. Though I lean more towards thinking that Warhammer might have a bigger word count, the truth is, and I cannot emphasize this enough, I have no idea which one is bigger. I saw a guy on Reddit or somewhere like that say that Warhammer actually has somewhere closer to 75 million, but I'm pretty sure that they're doing the same thing that I'm doing, which is basically pulling these numbers out of my ass. I'm gonna give this one to Warhammer, but it could go for both. Both is good. No Man's Sky. Okay, that was a bit of an unsatisfactory answer, but if you think about it, there aren't really that many contenders. No Man's Sky is a game where you basically go around the universe exploring different planets, and it has like 18 quintillion of them that you can go to. And they are actual planets, it takes close to 40 hours to walk around them. Multiply that by 4 pi r squared and that by 18 quintillion, and I'm pretty sure that by raw canon square mileage, No Man's Sky wins. If you consider all the things that are written in the planets, technically you also win by word count as well. But I'm sure you're curious about the other big boys by area, so let's take a look at them. Warhammer and Star Wars, expensive as they are, they only encompass one galaxy. There's this sci-fi series called Stargate about space exploration that seems to encompass multiple galaxies, at least 38 and at most an unspecified amount. I'm not sure whether or not they should be included here since only a handful of them are actually referred to or explored in the series. Even if we estimate that there's an average of like 1.5 planets per star and 100 billion stars per galaxy, Stargate would need at least 120 million galaxies to get to the same amount of planets as No Man's Sky, so I don't think they're gonna take this one. But then I thought of something different. DC has Crisis on Infinite Earths, doesn't it? Last time I checked, infinity is bigger than 18 quintillion, so does that mean that DC takes the cake? It depends on how you look at it. From what I could find, DC has like 52 different Earths scattered across different canons, and Marvel has like 160. Or 1,000, the numbers are iffy on this one. But the real shit is that most of these stories take place either on Earth, the solar system, or occasionally some random alien planet here and there. Is planet Honkers 3 from galaxy Bahanaga Hoogs located 6 billion light years away from the Milky Way canon in Marvel? No, but it might be in No Man's Sky. And speaking of which, tell me where it is. Even though 160 universes or 1,000 universes are bigger than No Man's Sky by area, it feels disingenuous to give it to them because they are different canons and technically different universes altogether. The metric I'm using is that the biggest fictional universe is the one that has the most amount of spaces that are either tangible, accessible, or relevant to the lore, all while being contained with one continuous canon. 1,000 universes with only a few important places was not going to cut it for me. Respect to all the DC and Marvel fans though, if you think that these are the largest universes for real, then there's your answer. Largest by timeline is the fictional universe that has its events spread out over the largest, tangibly continuous amount of time, and yet again this one is more on the subjective side. You could classify biggest timeline as the timeline that has the most events happening in it, but that brings forth another question, which is how should you classify an event? By that metric, whichever has the most documented things will have the biggest timeline, but defining how relevant something has to be considered an event is also kinda tricky. However, the alternative of saying that the longest timeline is whichever universe has the biggest amount of time between its first and last event also feels a bit disingenuous. Because, like, you could say that something happened at what point in time and then something else happened a Google years in the future, or infinity years in the future. But if there's nothing really happening between that vacant space, if you don't really see anything happening, can you really call it a proper timeline? I'll be real with you, I'm not smart enough to figure out an answer, so for the purposes of succumbing to my laziness, I'll just go with whichever universe takes the longest to happen wins. Let's get to it. The last question is a short story by Isaac about trying to figure out a way to reverse entropy. It begins in 2061 and ends after the heat death of the universe. Even if Warhammer and Star Wars and others have timelines that span tens of thousands of years, this is still nothing compared to the amount of time that it will take for the heat death of the universe to occur. But interestingly, the last question isn't the longest one, as Futurama has a timeline that spans the entire lifetime of the universe like 3 times, and it all happens in one episode during the span of like 3 minutes. However, I have heard an argument that Marvel had multiple different universes that existed before the current one and multiple ones that will exist afterwards. I did a little digging and I found out that before the current Marvel universe there were 6 singularities that happened, respective of the 6 Infinity Stones. But it's unclear whether they were actual universes, or how long it took between them, or if they were happening simultaneously, so I'm not sure if I should include them here. The information that the singularities are actual universes came from this one Reddit comment, so if they're wrong, go harass them and not me. So I'm gonna give this one to Futurama simply because it's a clean, continuous canon timeline, whereas Marvel and DC have parallel universes and multiverses and shit like that. If by your metric these previous universes are valid, then they win, otherwise Futurama. One last thing though is that technically any fictional universe with a cyclical component can win because there's no telling how many times the cycle has repeated before the beginning or after the end of the story. Stuff like my beloved Dark Souls, when it comes to the rekindling of the Age of Fire, it could have happened a minimum of 3 times, and at most, well, an infinite amount of times. Though this is unlikely since the quote-unquote last Age of Fire in Dark Souls 3 still has structures and stories and characters that survive since the first Age of Fire in Dark Souls 1. I don't actually know if that's the first Age of Fire. There's a whole thing about time being convoluted, and the final DLC of Dark Souls 3 literally takes place at the end of time. I don't know. I'm pretty sure we don't have a quantifiable numeric timeline for the Dark Souls universe, but I'm going to assume that all happens well before the heat death of its particular universe. Futurama still takes this one. Before we wrap this up, there was originally going to be a 4th category, which was fandom, and by fandom you could either mean the one with the biggest amount of fans, or the biggest amount of fan content about them. If you're not considering K-pop, the top contenders would either be Star Wars or Harry Potter. Apparently Harry Potter has the most amount of fanfics in all of fiction, but I've seen some places say that it's Twilight and others saying that it's Marvel. I don't know about Marvel, but the other two make a lot of sense considering the demographic. I didn't research them, so I don't know for sure, but I just wanted to give you 2 honorable mentions about the absolute insanity that are the fan universes from Undertale, and that one Loud House fanfic that is 21 times longer than the Bible. Okay, yeah, that's gonna be about it for me, and if you're wondering why it's taking me so long to upload, is because I was initially counting the words individually.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8...